Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. A few years ago, I began longing for more in my relationship with God. It was an ache, a restlessness to relate to Him beyond what I was currently experiencing. I was reading the Bible consistently. I was attending church weekly, but I felt stuck. And along with the stuckness, I grappled with a sense of shame. Why did I still feel so gripped with anxiety? Doesn't the Bible say that perfect love casts out fear? I read this verse. I prayed this verse, I believed this verse, fully convinced of the power of God's word. But reciting scripture wasn't touching the anxiety raging in my body. I wondered if I was doing something wrong. Why did God feel so distant? Was something wrong with me? I'd sit in church services, feeling my aloneness, and then leave an hour later, carrying with me a combination of confusion and desperation. Is this really all there is? I genuinely believed that God was good and worthy of my attention, and I'd say with my mind that He loved me and was always with me. But the reality of this felt as though it was a multiverse away. There was a disconnect between the theology that I believed about God in my head and my experience of Him, and I longed for more. Have you ever experienced similar longings and questions? You engage in spiritual disciplines, but these practices often feel more frustrating than relational and restful. Maybe you've attended church for years, perhaps even decades, but you find yourself depleted and unsure. You know and believe the right answers about God, but you still find yourself feeling like you don't really know Him or how to experience Him in an intimate way. What does that actually look like, and where do we start? Today, we are starting a new series on the podcast called From Knowing to Experiencing God, and these are some of the questions we'll be engaging. Over the next few months, we're going to explore what it means to move beyond conceptual knowledge about God and into personal encounter, to truly experience God's presence, hear His voice, and be transformed by His love. I'll be hosting conversations with guests who generously invite us into their spiritual journeys. They will be sharing some of their stories towards deeper intimacy with God and how they've come into this experiential relationship. In between interviews, I'm also going to be introducing us to habits or spiritual rhythms that I found to be transformative in my own journey. I've been thinking about this series for a while now, and I'll be honest, there's a part of me that comes to a huge topic like this one and wants practical steps. I want the checklist. I want concrete, straightforward answers. But here's what I'm learning and what I'd invite each of us to hold as we begin this series together. The spiritual journey that Jesus invites us to is so much more than this. It's deeper than this. It holds more mystery than this. It's longer and less linear than this. The hand that Jesus extends welcomes us to a walk that can't be mastered by 10 steps or to-do lists. This pathway to spiritual intimacy is more about learning to position ourselves to receive, remain, and respond to God's love in everyday life. It's less about performance and more about presence, less about doing and more about waiting and receiving. It's less about knowing the right things and more about becoming captivated with the person who already knows and delights in us. Like any other intimate relationship in our lives, God invites us to a kind of transformational friendship that involves patient intentionality, honest conversation, and rupture and repair. A kind of relationship that is weathered with time, that deepens as we share our hearts, process our longings, emotions, and hurts, and bring our whole selves to the table. It involves our learning to open up the very foundation of us, where we feel most uncertain, exposed, and vulnerable, and experiencing the kind presence of God coming to commune with us here. I remember the first time I sensed God's invitation to deeper intimacy. My sophomore year of college, I went to Costa Rica on a missions trip with a small team from my church. During one of the afternoons that we were in the city of Cartago, a ministry event was suddenly canceled, and we found ourselves with an unexpected hour of free time. Since we were already in the city, we bused a short distance to a famous cathedral known as the Basilica of Our Lady of the Angels. I remember walking into the cathedral through huge, creaking doors, totally unprepared for what I was about to see. The cathedral was cool and dimly lit, soaked with the smell of burning incense, and as my eyes slowly adjusted, I observed my surroundings. The architecture was magnificent, with high dome ceilings and beautiful mosaics, and most of the cathedral's light came from hundreds of candles, lining almost every flat surface and casting the entire space in flickering light. Wooden pews lined the cathedral's center, and a simple cross stood behind a white railing towards the front of the room. I remember being mesmerized by the beautiful artwork, but as my gaze slowly traveled across the room, my breath caught in my throat when I saw the center aisle. In solemn lines, dozens of people crawled, slowly inching to the cross. I remember tapping one of the local missionaries on the shoulder and asking him what they were doing. He responded quickly, and I heard the sadness in his voice. They're crawling to prove to God their piety. When they reach the cross, they pray and hope that their good performance has warranted his favor. I remember slipping into one of the back pews, unable to look away. I had never seen anything like it before. It was like time stopped as I sat speechless and watched a sea of fear-laced faces and questioning eyes gradually shuffle to the cross. Everyone wore their best. All the men wore long pants and ironed shirts. The women wore knitted shawls around their shoulders and long, colorful skirts. But the atmosphere was somber and dark. I could sense the desperation, feel the pain, and see the worried thoughts running through minds as dozens stilled in prayer, stooped on hands and knees, and began the long crawl down the length of the cathedral towards the cross. I remember the moment that my attention was captured by an older couple entering the room. The woman hobbled slightly ahead, her knotted, purple-veined hands clutching a cane. Gait unsteady, she paused for a moment, regaining her balance, before handing her cane to her husband. I watched her shawl slip off one shoulder as she lowered herself to the floor, body trembling. She winced as her knees pressed against the marble floor. Her husband bent and whispered into her ear, stooping to support her. The woman shook her head firmly, pushing him away, but I saw her eyes. They glistened with fear and uncertainty. And in the lines creasing this older woman's face, I glimpsed at an anguished soul. Have I been good enough to deserve God's favor? Will God actually hear me among these masses? How is it that I can kneel before the cross of Christ and he still feels so far away? I started crying and then couldn't stop, something about her resonating so deeply with me. And I sensed God's gentle prompting in my spirit. Do you see her? That is how you approach me too. As I watched this woman crawl, I saw myself in her. I didn't know her story, but I related to her posture towards God, and it shocked me. This woman externally embodied my internal reality, one of striving and approval seeking. And up to this point, I had been totally unaware that I had been relating to God in this way. It jarred me, not only in recognizing my own posture towards God, but in beginning to peel back the layers to how I actually perceived him. If this is how I instinctively approached God, then what picture of him did I hold in my heart and mind? And this awareness stirred something in me, a longing for something more, for something deeper. Just like any other relationship, intimacy with God isn't something that can be forced or manufactured. It's the byproduct of a genuine desire to know God and be known by him. But before we can really desire God, we must have a clearer understanding of who God is and what he is like. We'll be talking a lot more about this in the upcoming weeks, but our experiences shape our experience of God, often forming and informing a flawed or incomplete vision of who God is that isn't just intellectual or cognitive, but that is enstoried and deeply embedded in our hearts and bodies. So many of us have only heard a gospel message that teaches that Jesus had to die for us to satisfy the wrath of God. This gospel message is communicated as a form of legal requirement where we are pronounced not guilty. But that gospel doesn't tell us whether God delights in us or not, whether his heart swells with joy every time we lock eyes with him, or as Zephaniah 3:17 describes, that he rejoices over us with singing. I mean, just think about that for a minute. Have you ever pictured that? That gospel doesn't include the reason recorded in Hebrews 12 why Jesus endured the cross, for the joy set before him. What was the joy set before him? Relationship with us. To say this another way, it's entirely possible to believe that you're forgiven, but not that you're liked. And if this is how we feel, then how we relate to God, even after receiving the good news of Christ, will remain savaged by the need to earn his approval. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the words that Jesus speaks in Revelation 3. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. This verse is often used when talking about salvation, but Jesus isn't actually talking to unbelievers here. He's talking to people who are already his followers. And what is he saying? I'm knocking and I won't stop. Will you open the door so that I can commune with you? God longs to come in, to hydrate our souls, to live there, beautifying and singing in the heart of our deepest self. He enjoys spending time with us and longs to share our life with us, inviting us to find rest and joy in his presence. So to wrap up this episode, here's what I want to close with. There's a reason why this series is following our series on self-awareness, and why I'd really encourage you to go back and listen if you haven't yet. Why? Because this journey of learning to drink deeply of God's love begins with our own awakening to us. Think about it. The healthiest human relationships are built on two self-aware people able to bring their whole selves compassionately to the table. When one refuses to face the currents within them, their lack of awareness keeps them from loving and being loved more deeply. If we don't lean into awareness of our inner depths, longings, emotions, and hurts, we can't experience the intimacy with God that our souls crave. But the more we acknowledge and pay attention to what's happening within, the more deeply we can experience the beauty and loving presence of God. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.